Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And if you're in the here and now, you're welcome too. This is Grant Cameron, and I'm talking to you from the bunker underneath the Poco Palace here on the West Coast in BC. And I'm joined by my assistant and co-host here, Cindy Voll, and she's up above Salt Lake City, and she will be soon heading outside Salt Lake City to her new estate. And we're joined by a guest that we've had once before, one of the most interesting guests we've had for a long time, Katie Paige. And we're going to get Cindy to sort of start it off here. And then we're going to get into some weird stories. We were actually talking before we started to tape here, and we all these stories are coming. I said, "Well, let's tape." We were missing half the program here. We've told 20 stories already. So go ahead, Cindy.
So Katie, this is the second time Katie's returned to our Grand Cameron's podcast, and she has been on Skinwalker Ranch, written countless books, and she is very knowledgeable in the ufology field. And how many years have you been at it, Katie?
Well, I've kind of been experiencing things really my whole life, even back to my grandfather in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. But as so many people do, they have weird experiences they can't explain and they try to write it off. And it's interesting too, because I think back, 10, 15 years ago, we compartmentalized much more so than we do now. So
Yeah.
if you have a ghost encounter, you're putting it in a ghost box and we try to I'm just seeing things out of the corner of my eye. If you have a UFO, that goes in the UFO box. A cryptid goes in the cryptid box. But more and more of those are coming together.
Yep.
But so many of us, we go on to raise families and our jobs keep us busy. So I think so many people, as life starts slowing down and you're not in the rigmarole of baseball games and this, that, and the other thing, hockey games, you can start going back and question and try to figure out answers. And that's what happened to me a little over 15 years ago. So I've been kind of really hardcore at it for 15 plus years, but always have been experiencing things throughout my life.
Yeah. How many books have you written?
Well, I wrote Letters of Love and Light, which is really about Dr. Leo Sprinkle and his 40 years. I spent 3.5 years at the archives on Letters of Love and Light. Then I
Yeah.
co-authored the Snippy book, which just recently came out because, David Marler just recently acquired the original APRO files. So we got to see all this data and photographs and recordings that were lost for over 35 years. So that was just a labor of love for the King family, which Nellie Lewis King was one of the owners of Snippy, along with her husband Burl. And so that was a 6-month project. And then I've been writing, I've been writing over 3 years now, actually 4 years, the Rocky Mountain Ranch book. And it got to the point, because this is an emotional journey for me, all the experiences. So it's like I'll get through a chapter and have to process for a month or two or three, that kind of
Wow.
thing. So now I have Tony kind of helping me ghostwrite that a little bit, because that way I can be a little more distant from it and not so emotionally involved in the book. But it's important information that I want to get out to the people. So that is the next book coming out. And then
Wow.
and then the other one I think you're referring to. What did I put it under my computer. I needed to lift up my screen. But we have this new little series that we're working on, which is kind of fun. It's called Flying Saucers, Aliens, and this is the first one right here. It's Gremlins. So we're talking about the Foo Fighters and,
Oh,
the fentanyl and things like that. The little
Wow.
things that would mess with the aircraft and things like that. And then the next one in the series is going to be Flying Saucers, Aliens, and Guns. Because there's all these kind of unique outlier cases of people like shooting at entities or craft and things like that. So that's kind of a fun series that we've started as well.
hmm.
Wow.
What's your impression of the Foo Fighters? What do you think was going on there? Is that messaging or what is that?
Um, I think, it's interesting because I was just looking at, in researching kind of this disclosure movement that's going on and looking at your book, the Managing Magic that you
Hmm.
wrote in 2017.
Great
Yeah.
book.
And yeah, and in there I'm seeing documents of these silver balls, like what they're documenting now. I don't know what I think. I'm still on the fence about that a little bit. I want more information about that. They call it the Boogosphere.
Boogosphere, yeah.
Boogosphere. But maybe perhaps even back in the Foo Fighter days, they were seeing something similar as the Boogosphere.
Yeah.
But according to reports, are more illuminates. They're not so solid in structure. So I'm not sure what I think of that. Maybe something was curious. I feel like that even goes back to Roswell and New Mexico, and we're building weapons of mass destruction.
Mhm.
Something up there, we got their attention, and they're like, "What's going on? Why are these people warring with each other?" And we were advancing aircraft and things like that. So I think there's an intelligence that's sort of keeping an eye on our
Yeah.
our weapons and our
Yeah,
progression and things like
for
that.
Have,
sure.
That's what I
have
think they
you
probably were,
have
just
you
kind of
heard the story of the latest story of the tape that was recovered with um oh, and his name is going to escape me now, the interviewer, but it was Jesse Marcel Sr. This tape that's been recovered where he talks about the UFO sighting he had the month before Roswell. He's going to the base, and there's five UFOs in a formation, and it's sort of like nobody'd ever heard that before, and they got on tape, and so you start to see, well, there was more than just Roswell. It was like they almost like they were giving him a heads up the month before the event actually took place, and he didn't think it crashed. He thought it exploded, which then goes back to the one with the Maury Island one a couple of weeks before, where it exploded, or over Washington with the first sort of sighting 3 days before Kenneth Arnold. So you get all these things, and they all sort of look to me like they're this sort of signaling thing. Because my father was a pilot for the Air Force, and his boss actually had a Foo Fighters sighting and talked about this. And you see this bizarre, why would they go on the edge of the plains? The only thing that is sort of similar to me is the Nimitz thing, where they talked about these things were apparently sitting there for a week waiting for them to chase them, and they had seen them for a whole week, and then they decided to chase them, and then all this excitement starts, like they're playing around with the military, and nobody has an answer to it, and yet everybody gets drawn into this sort of wild mystery of what's actually going on here.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of books, I think that would be a great one. I need to get my hands on the former state director for Colorado MUFON was Doug Wilson.
Oh.
And Doug, if you ever see this, I'm calling you, but he had a presentation years ago about the wave of 1947. And I think the average person doesn't realize the amount of sightings that were taking place, especially around New Mexico
Yeah.
and really kind of up and down the whole Midwest, even in Arizona and others. In 1947, we were drawing the attention of someone like there are so many sightings that most people haven't even heard of. And Doug Wilson put together this great presentation of all these different sightings of 47 that I was like overwhelmed with how many there were that I wasn't even aware of. So that would be a cool book idea to
Yeah.
get
Well, think
just
about it.
those. It's
That's
crazy.
just in the US.
Yeah,
Think
just
about it globally.
right. China too. Yeah. So I have a new project in the works, Skinwalker China, which is going to be a fun collaboration. But I've been doing a lot of research on that, and sure enough, those go way back to the early 40s as well, even earlier than 47.
How does China fit into this?
Just the sightings that they had. I'm going to be doing a new Skinwalker series, get Skinwalker China.
But
Okay, so
how do you get information out of China?
yeah,
Because
that's
it's
the
so
question. Yeah.
closed.
Right. Well, I have a new friend and partner that has lived in China for many, many years and is well connected in the entertainment world. And so he's kind of working with people that are in China right now, kind of feeding me some information in different cases and things like that. But you're right. It's kind of like a delicate,
Yeah.
delicate thing to kind of maneuver. But I think if we just stay focused on the phenomena, and not only UFOs, but the paranormal and spirits. So the Chinese culture is steeped in folklore on the spirit realm.
Right.
So if I kind of keep it focused on that way, because you're right, I kind of thought to myself, well, I can't really talk about like, NORAD or anything, like
Yeah.
secrets you
Yeah.
don't want to know. But I think we're going to just stay focused strictly on the phenomena and try to bridge the gap and try to learn as much as I can. I think it'll be a very interesting adventure to go on
Have
to
you,
learn more
have you
about that.
followed the Children of China? For the 1983, Robert Emmenegger was given a job by Hal Puthoff. He bunch of videos and stuff with the kids with the telekinesis and stuff like that. These young kids that they were grooming, and apparently, I guess the CIA was watching at great length these kids, and they had videos and stuff like that. And Bob was going to go do a documentary there, and he never went to China. But is that part of the what you're going to be dealing with? Because China seems to, and that was like in the 80s. So if
Yeah.
they were doing this child thing in the 80s, and you know how China can work. I mean, you can just grab all these kids and you have programs and you put them in, it's full time and that's what they do. And they can put a lot of effort in it. They don't need any rules and regulations and stuff like that, where it seemed like they were way ahead of us in these children with telekinesis and these kind of things.
Well, that's certainly a hot topic right now for sure. With the, I saw the telepathy tapes has part two coming out, and these
Yeah.
nonverbal children and that. So yeah, they were ahead of the curve. And I have to wonder, like, have they followed these children throughout their lives? And, same with the United States. We all know there were programs put in place here as well that have been very deeply buried, some of which I'm kind of uncovering just as fate would have it recently on some of the programs in Colorado with the ranch and stuff like that, which we can into here in a little bit. But yeah, I hope to kind of learn more about that. But you're right, it is a closed society and it's going to be, a little challenging, but whatever I can get, it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to learn.
You might send a letter to Hal and just say that
Yeah.
I mentioned it, and he, because he's got all the documents and stuff like that. He just, they were going to go do it for him, do this thing, but and
Oh,
nobody went and did it. So maybe that's your in, that he'll give you all the material and give you a lot of leads as to what happened to these kids and what the CIA evaluated and stuff like that.
oh, that'd be so interesting. I'll have to reach out to him.
We were talking before the show, and then I'll pass it over to Cindy. We were talking before the show about Desta Barnabe talking about the GATE program. So for Desta, can you talk a little bit, because you were going down the same sort of road and you've got some material. Can you talk a little bit about that thing, this idea of the Americans, Canadians, I guess, of grabbing these kids, out of school, almost what the CIA used to do, where they like recruited Bill Moore out of university because he could speak fluent French and stuff like that, where they watch the leading edge kids in school and try to recruit them. So you've done some work on that? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I feel like sometimes, probably Grant and Cindy, you've experienced this as well, but it's almost as if we recognize or see information when we're meant to see it. Because I
Mhm.
can't tell you, I mean, I have a stack of so many things and reports on the ranch, right?
Yeah.
And I've read over it and read over it and read over it, and I'll focus my attention on certain parts and overlook other parts. Well, recently on UAP Studies, we had a guest and on, um, and he was talking about the gateway tapes. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to, get on YouTube and start listening to the gateway tapes programs, which is kind of a deep relaxation, kind of astro traveling, remote viewing, these kind of things. And I believe it was the third tape where it was like your arms are heavy and warm, warmth is flowing into your hands, you're getting into this deep relaxed state. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is verbatim what I went through while I was on the ranch in my childhood. These are my tapes. I still have the cassette tapes. So for a year and a half, I was put into this program called the Twilight Learners Program. And what's really interesting, I went into it. So the scariest night on the ranch, which if you watch any of the episodes of Beyond Skinwalker, where we're doing that radio experiment, I'm trying to communicate with whatever was communicating back in the 70s through that disembodied electronic voice. And I did get responses during that episode.
Mm.
Well,
Wow.
so after that very night on the ranch, we drove back because I didn't live on this ranch full time. My mom was dating the guy that owned the ranch. So we drive 45 minutes back to our house, and that hitchhiker phenomenon, which I didn't know what it was at the time, I do now, was very much in play at that point. And I got a full blown migraine headache where I was like paralyzed, couldn't speak, that whole thing. And so
Mm.
my mom gets approached by a gentleman at work, which is also very mysterious, and
Mhm.
to put me in this program. And this program is run by a Thomas H. Bedinsky, PhD. So I start doing just a Google search on who's Thomas H. Bedinsky, right? I come to find out. So I'm thinking this is just for biofeedback, migraine headache management. But what I come to find out is Thomas H. Bedinsky was a navigational engineer at Area 51 for the SR-71 Blackbird. Okay. Then he just leaves Area 51 and starts this biofeedback program, is working with the Menninger Foundation, is working with the Monroe Institute, working with the CIA Stargate program and the Gateway program. And what's
Wow.
fascinating about the program that I was in, I would go, so this was in the Denver Tech Center in Colorado, 2 doors down from where my mom worked as a computer programmer operator for United Airlines. So I would go every week, 2 doors over, and they would put little things on my fingers, and I was being trained to raise and lower the temperature of my hands, and then the earphones and the thing around my head. And what they did, so I'm 10 and 11 years old at this time,
Mm-hmm.
and they were trying to keep me in a theta state. Okay. So they keep you in a theta state. And then as I'm learning about all these connections and what all these programs were and what they were doing with children, I even found an old video on YouTube. If you type in on YouTube, anybody can find it, like type in biofeedback, Colorado, Thomas H. Badinsky, and a video will come up. And in that video, towards the end, they have a little boy by the name of Kevin, and he's hooked up to the same thing I was. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's it. And he's like, they're going, okay, Kevin, can you make the rocket go? Can you make the rocket land? And I'm thinking in my head, this guy is a navigational engineer at Area
Wow.
51. And if they back engineer any craft, maybe they're using children or, that kind of psi ability to try to maneuver and understand the craft. Because as I feel like probably a lot of the navigational systems of advanced ET craft are probably run by the mind,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
right? So of course they're going to use children, and we mentioned the Chinese, probably Germany and Russia, all these people were looking into that decades ago. But to make that connection now, all these years later, to that program, I'm like, maybe that's why I'm such a good lucid dreamer, because I was trained at a very early age to stay in that theta state. So it's really fascinating. And the more connections I'm making, the more interesting and deep it's getting. I mean, I've always known that there was a military presence on the ranch. We have in Dr. Leo Sprinkle's files, we know, and even Dodie admitted to me, like we had soldiers from Camp Carson there, and he talks about this strange box that I saw and many adults saw, and my sister saw as well, and the police officer there in Elbert County saw this strange box. But they would say that this box was sitting there and he felt something wrong. This soldier from Camp Carson, something took over his mind, made him walk toward the woods, would release him as if it had some sort of mind control over him. He'd run back to the ranch house, and this did this to him 5 times. So why are there soldiers there on the ranch property? And one of the gentlemen that owned the Rocky Mountain Ranch, he came from San Francisco. I don't think his name's real. I think it's a pseudonym because I've tried to search his name. His name was John Duke. He's recently passed away. But he claims to have been Air Defense Command out of San Francisco. And in some of these documents, he talks about taking legal LSD and things like that. And he talks about vagrants and homeless people coming to the property. What are they doing there? What's going on there? And then you add the part where I have my half brother who is institutionalized for being an arsonist. He burnt down a couple of our houses at Pueblo State, which is really close to the Air Force Academy. So part of me wonders, Grant mentioned gifted children in these programs and the Stargate program, but I also believe, and I think there's some documentation, not a lot, because a lot of this stuff's been buried so deep, that they were working with kids and families of trauma. And also, like for me, it was like I was on the hyperactivity end, the
Yeah.
ADHD, the dyslexia, the learning disabilities, all these excuses they gave me for being pulled out of class all the time, speech impediments, things like that. And I'm thinking back, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't have a speech impediment, it wasn't that, but it was like that kind of story. So I think they were looking at both spectrums, like the gifted and talented kids, and then the hyperactive, the trauma kind of kids, which
Yeah.
would make sense to me. So it's a fascinating kind of rabbit hole to go down, and it's all fairly new for me that I'm just now connecting these dots.
Do you know what happened to your program? How where it went, or or how long were you involved in it?
I was involved for a year and a half. Every week I'd go into, and another interesting memory I have about that is I would go into the office, and I remember walking into the door, and there was like Badinsky's office right there with a desk, and then there were two other little rooms with a brown leather chair, and the biofeedback equipment. But I don't ever remember any other patients being there or people being there. And in fact, I kind of remember falling asleep a lot of the time. I would fall asleep in that brown leather chair, and I'd, get kind of shook and wake back up. You need to stay in this theta state.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a really strange memory, but I don't know what happened to the program. And that's, I need to find that out.
Yeah, because you just well they've actually confirmed that DARPA's working on all this kind of stuff. I always bring up the thing where it shows you how far they may have come, and that is this whole idea about flying the craft. Or you had the movie where they stole the Russian MiG, where Clint Eastwood is flying it with his mind and stuff like that. And you go back to 2004, so that's 21 years ago. University of Southern Florida, they take 25,000 neurons from a rat brain, they put it into a petri dish, and after about 2 or 3 days, the brain they start talking. These neurons are all talking to each other. They put 60 electrodes underneath, link it up, and they wire it to an F-22 simulator. And this is back 21 years ago. And this thing flies the simulator. They teach it how to fly the simulator. Then they put, high weather storms and stuff like that, and it just keeps flying the simulator. And then that was it. I tried to find out what happened to that program, or what this guy did after that. And it's sort of like that was one experiment. And it was almost like the military grabbed it and took it into the black world. And so if that they're doing that 21 years ago, where they've got 25,000 neurons of a rat brain flying an F-22 simulator, you can imagine what they've got now in the black world.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder. And this stuff is buried so deep. And my other question is, if these kids, and there has to be just hundreds, if not thousands, of these people put into these programs
Yeah.
unwittingly that they don't know about across the country,
Yeah.
and are they monitoring some of these people? Are they still kind of, do they have their finger on, is it a continual thing through the decades, or is it just a one and done? They got what they needed and then they, don't even consider it anymore? I don't know. That's a question I have. And part of me always feels like this is part of the reason why we're not going to see disclosure, at least I'm not a big believer that we'll see it in my lifetime
Yeah.
because of liability and things like that. Like if these programs get exposed to the public, and you're going to have a whole lot of really angry people and lawsuits coming up. So unless they can somehow protect that, so we wouldn't have the ability to sue or go after or want compensation in any kind of way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think it's part of the cover up.
Yeah. Cindy, go
Like
ahead.
everything else.
Yeah, right.
So how far are you into your book?
The Rocky Mountain Ranch book. Well, I'm about 6 chapters. I think we're starting on chapter 7. And I believe that everything happens when it should, because I was going to try and get this book out before the Beyond Skinwalker series. And then, which would have been a bad mistake. I would have had to have done another book anyway, because at that point I hadn't even been back to the ranch and I didn't know if things were still going on. And I've learned so much more, just like what we were just talking about. Now I can include that into the book, where before it wouldn't have been in the book at all because I didn't even go down that rabbit hole. So I feel like it's coming together as it should, and I'm learning more and more and more as we're going. I'm not so sure Beyond Skinwalker is going on for season 4, which is disappointing, but we are set to go out to the Rocky Mountain Ranch next month. So hopefully we can do a little bit more experimenting, and I have some things up my sleeve that I would like to try to do that Trey Hudson did down south, where they did they had the mask on and had questions, and then he was answering. Those kind of experiments would be fun to do at the ranch, which they didn't do for Beyond Skinwalker. But I want to try some things like that out there, see what happens, and add
Can
those
you,
to the book too.
can you give us a little teaser as to what goes on there? And I want the other question that was related is, when I watch the Skinwalker Ranch show, I always see that there's this idea now that the phenomena does something different every time. And so, like, they have the thing where they break the beam, and we had people photographing this with orbs, broken beams. So I go, like, this is old stuff, but they picked it up. And then it was like, okay, let's shoot a rocket up. And it's like, no, no, do the same experiment. Why you add rockets now? And it's like they want it for the drama or whatever. But then it's almost like never do the same experiment twice. And these different things happening. It's underneath the hill or the ridge, and then they're breaking the beams, and then you got this thing at 3,000 feet, and it's like it's doing something different every time. And so, are you getting the same sort of thing, or are you getting a repeated phenomena happening over and over again?
Yeah, that is such a great point. All of those are great points because at the end of the day, these shows are for entertainment and they have
Yeah,
to follow a narrative. Kind of, we're going to
yeah,
go along with this storyline or thing. And the guys love shooting rockets. It's
yeah,
entertaining. It's entertaining and it's fun. And they did it at Rocky Mountain Ranch too, kind of poking the hornet's nest.
yeah,
But something a lot of people don't realize is, and I wonder about this also, and maybe I should or shouldn't say this, I don't know, but Beyond Skinwalker and Skinwalker Ranch are two different production
yeah,
teams. And Beyond Skinwalker didn't really get greenlit unless Travis Taylor kind of had control over how the story is going to unfold. So it's fascinating to me, and what I love about what Beyond Skinwalker people did. So you're out there filming for a week
yeah,
with cameras just kind of almost all the time. You kind of
Yeah.
forget they're there. But they were truly, like, really, number one, they were very respectful of the experiences of my family and Greg and his family, and just kind of letting things unfold naturally. But they also were interested in, like, say, these mysterious boxes and the Sasquatch and other parts of my experience that never makes it into the series because it doesn't follow along with the Skinwalker Ranch. There's only so
yeah,
much I think that the audience wants to absorb. And a good case in point for season one, when you see me go on to that ranch, that was the first time back since I was a little girl. I've never met Greg in person or his
wow,
daughter or his wife, Chris. And we're sitting in the garage and they're sharing pictures of when they bought the place 30 some plus years ago. And
mhm,
I'm remembering, oh, yeah, that's what the house looked like and this and that. And with cameras rolling all around, he he tells me some things that were quite disturbing to me, which kind of speak to the occult side of things.
Hmm.
Some things that they found in the forest behind the ranch house where it was like this sacrificial, what they called a cradle, and carvings in the trees and stickers in the windows and some kind of occult practices.
yeah,
You hear about
Wow.
people playing with Ouija boards and magic
yeah,
and things like that. That was very much the case on the ranch. And so I'm having these memories of being a little girl and I'm just like, and I think the crew wanted to kind of go with it. I'm like, no, 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 no. I'm just learning this for the first time. I need to process this, turn the cameras off. And they did. They did. And then later that night in the hotel room when we went back, I got pulled aside from the producer and he goes, I just want you to know History Channel really won't touch like stuff on religions or demons or, that kind of thing. They don't want to go that far down. And I'm like, thank goodness, because that's something, that we have to battle. And, I felt like immediately, I feel like it was like 2 or 3 weeks after I filmed that, I was in Arizona with the Paranormal Rangers
right,
and John Dover, and that's the season I got that attack on my back, that
mhm,
handprint, that's like a radiation burn on my shoulder that first night back on the ranch. And I don't know if it was attacking me or helping me or what. I didn't really assign a good or bad feeling towards it. It was just strange. It was hot to the touch. It blistered, looked like a handprint, quite
Wow.
large. I have the pictures I can share with you guys. But and John Dover learned of this. So he took me to the back of the hotel and he goes, look, normally we don't do this with people outside of the tribe. But since we know of your connection to the ranch, he did this whole ceremony, a cleansing ceremony for me, and put the bitter on my tongue and did this whole um, protection. And it was really powerful and really special. And then after I finished that with John, I started, we were exercising or walking around the parking lot, and I literally felt like something pulled me back, like, whoom, like this from my, and I was like, whoa, what was that? So I don't know. I've always like I get a lot of people reaching out to me, oh my gosh, there's something bad or something, but I've always felt like very protected and guarded in a way. So I really struggle with that whole concept of, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And I think it's how we interpret it and how we manifest it personally. Like if you see the
Yeah,
good, you're going to see good, and if you see
yeah.
the bad, you're going to see bad. You know.
When it comes to the occult stuff, so you find the occult stuff, did the experiences start after the occult stuff before they bought the ranch? Because I always had the impression, especially like with Skinwalker Ranch, that you had the Navajo and the Ute, and they were fighting and throwing curses on each other. And it's like, well, of course the place is it's because it has this idea that somebody commits suicide in a house, that energy stays there, and that if you're doing black magic or whatever they're doing. You have they're going to change the environment around, and you're going to leave all these negative entities until someone comes and cleans the place up.
Yeah, absolutely. I've come to feel like it's like this melting pot of certain aspects of that. And certainly in Elbert County, Colorado, and Kiowa, and that whole region, actually, because it wasn't just this one ranch
Yeah.
property, it was Elbert County. I mean, from Franktown to Elizabeth, the Kiowa to Rama. And, it's very, we have the Palmer Divide. It's very much like the Uinta Basin. It's very highly magnetic. It has a limestone and certain geological things. But then we have the Native American tribes that, right, when I went to the archives, I was researching horrific battles. Some tribes were aligning with each other. And then, of course, we had the warring tribes. And then you bring the white man in on that. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, John Dover's ancestors were part of the Sand Creek Massacre, actually. And he's still working for compensation for some of the victims of the Sand Creek Massacre, which is one of the most horrific battles with, the white men kind of just slaughtering women and children and things like this. And that happened pretty close to the ranch. So we had the Ute and the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, the Comanche, the Pawnee, the Kiowa. And in one of these horrific battles that actually took place very near the Rocky Mountain Ranch was the Hungate family. And the Hungate family was kind of the precursor to the Sand Creek Massacre. So the Hungate family, they don't know which tribe exactly. The articles that I found never really specified which tribe, but they were, slaughtered and scalped, and they were wheeled by a wagon to the capital of Denver. And this infuriated people so much, hence the retaliation at the Sand Creek Massacre. And all that happened right there around the Rocky Mountain Ranch. So, Grant, I agree with you. I think the land, the water,
Yeah.
the minerals, they retain that.
Yeah.
And then the ranch property sat vacant for 7 to 10 years, is what the documents say. And I always thought, well, we know there was a military presence, but if the military, because back in the mid to late 70s, the Air Force Academy owned a lot of that property across I-25. It kind of almost butted up to where the ranch sits. And
Okay.
I'm like, well, if they wanted to own that ranch and use it for test experiments, why didn't they just purchase it? Why did they let this other family buy it? But
Yeah.
then you find out that my mom's boyfriend and John Duke bought it. Well, he was part of the military, and if they needed test subjects,
Oh,
the
yeah.
vagrants and the homeless and
Yeah.
families of trauma
Yeah.
at the ranch to do these experiments, that's why they bought it.
Mm.
So they could bring the people on and run these tests that they were doing in secret.
Do you have Aboriginal advisors or Native advisors that sort of give you background on what's going on in terms of your production stuff?
Yeah, other than, I just had Michelle Miners on. She's done work in the Uinta Basin, Blind Frog and Skinwalker, and she's a good resource as well as the Paranormal Rangers, Stan and John. They're good references and resources for me to talk to. And then just talking to local folks as well. There's been a few that know that history well. And even looking at the families that owned the ranch pre us coming in on it. There was that guy born and raised there, and he ended up being the caretaker for Winter Park Ski Resort, but his name was Dick Mulligan. It was known as the Mulligan Homestead or the Mulligan Ranch, and he had the gift of bold exaggeration. So I feel like he had this reputation of storytelling, but maybe he was just trying to tell people what was going on that property all those years ago.
Yeah.
You know.
Um,
Wow.
So it looks like
Fascinating.
it predates the military coming in, I guess. And that's always been one of my questions, like chicken or the egg. And I really feel the phenomenon's been going on way before the military
Yeah.
presence.
Oh, for
Same with
sure.
the animal mutilations too.
Yeah. That would make sense.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
look back at the old times with the where Skinwalker was, and it was the whole thing about when the Mormons, the white people came in there, and it went. I think it was beginning before the Civil War. There was 22,000 Utes, and after the Civil War, 1870, somewhere in there was only 8,000 left. And I don't know what the background was, but you can assume there was a lot of you know stuff going on that just gets wiped away. And in the paranormal, it's always this thing about trauma. Like we wrote the book Contact Modalities, and we looked at 70 different modalities where people could get in the field, get material, come back, whether it was channeling or mediumship or whatever it was. And there was always a trauma event to it. There was always seemed to be this thing with trauma. And that's the government seems to be looking for is they understand this young children and trauma is these two events where either the left brain's not online or somebody's traumatized and they've dissociated and the left brain is trying to save itself and it opens up people into the field. So it's kind of scary that you have to deal with this kind of stuff because you got to relate these kind of stories to the American people without really scaring the living daylights out of them as to what might have happened in our past because you look at it and you wonder like what really did go on. It looks worse and worse as you go along as we missed this, we didn't know this was going on and that.
Yeah, it's a fine line, but at the end of the day, and I think Cindy and I have had this conversation, like after you do this, I'm sure Grant, you've hit this crossroads too. You research and you read and you gobble up all this information. And, selfishly, I guess I started out just to try to answer my own experiences and questions. But at some point, you get to like, now what? Now, what do I do with this? How can I help other people? How can I be of service to other people? And when you're dealing with a topic like this, especially when you're talking about people like my half brother, yes, there was a lot of trauma involved. Yes, there's things going on. We know without any doubt that, especially in the 60s and 70s, they did some horrific things to people that were institutionalized. Um, but how can we bring that forward without making it so dark? And even with the Snippy case, for example, that's a horrific mutilation of an animal, and it's pretty dark and scary. But at the same time, we need to look all that in the face. We need to uncover it, expose it for what it is, move past it, and learn from it, and so things don't get repeated again in the future. Or at the very least, that some of these people that did experience this stuff have a voice and feel not so isolated and alone at the end of the day. Because a lot of these people that deal with this stuff, as we know, they get PTSD, they'll turn to drugs, they'll turn to alcohol, all these kind of things because they feel isolated and alone and they don't really have a network or anybody to reach out to and go, oh, you've been there too. This is what's going on. And I think that in of itself can be, of great help and service to people that need that.
So do you think I can't remember where I heard this, the current owner, Brandon, when he and was it his brother or friend when they were helicopter from Salt Lake City to Skinwalker, they actually up on arrival before they land, they actually all say prayers
Prayer, yeah.
because they realize that it's very reflective. The
Mhm.
experience is conscious reflective.
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation I had with Tom and Silly Miller. We drove down to Trinidad and they were featured on Beyond Skinwalker as well and have had animal mutilations for decades down there. Well, first of all, I wanted to talk to them more about the hitchhiker phenomenon if they experienced it. But a conversation, it led into why certain ranchers were experiencing mutilations and the hitchhiker paranormal type of things and other ranchers were not. And the answer from Tom and Sally Miller really kind of got my gears spinning, which was he said, and she said that it seemed to be whatever the phenomena is, whatever this is, seems to be just as attracted not only to the location and the place, but to the people. And I'm like, huh, that is fascinating to me. And to your point, Cindy, absolutely. It's it's the people, how we interpret, how we react, and where we put our focus, right? So yeah, and that was a question when I met Greg, because Greg, the family that has lived there for over 30 some years since our experiences. Um, you know, they've had they raised their family there. They raised their daughter there. They had really good. It's as if the ranch really likes them. And if you think about it, that's really interesting because the ranch is responding to the love and light of the family, and so for them, it was for all intents and purposes, mostly good experiences. They had a few paranormal things, but not many, not compared to what was going on during the mid to late 70s when we were there. So it begs the question, why so intense then? What was happening then that kind of opened up the more high strange stuff that has kind of really tapered down through the decades? And it could be a number of things. It could be because more people moved in, and for whatever reason, high strange just likes more isolated places. It could be just the people that are there are more positive, and we didn't have that occult kind of side of things going on that opened up whatever portals or gateways.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of questions that are unanswered, but
Have you gotten any help in terms of what you're doing in terms of intuition, dreams, where it seems like someone's trying to guide you and what's the next step? Go here, go there. Some people will talk about synchronicities and stuff like that.
all the time.
It reminds me that before you go on, it reminds me of I talked to the regressionist in LA, and I asked her, she had done hundreds of regressions. I said,
Robert Lim.
no, she wrote the Chosen. Anyway, I was talking to her, and I said to her, how many people that you're dealing with have weird stuff happening to them? And she starts laughing. She goes like 99%.
99%. Yeah. That's why
Yvonne Smith was the one I was talking to. Yvonne Smith.
Bon Smith. Okay. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that. Because that's the concept that a lot of people get is that the phenomenon wants a story out where you take Sherry Wild, where she wakes up at her computer and she sees the word programs on, and it's like page 3.5, and she's going, "Wait, I've never used to open the word program, and what's going on here?" And she reads it, and she goes, "No, no, we're not going there. I'm not." It's her book, eh? And they wanted her to write the book, and I've even now trying to contact a girl who was working as a marine biologist and then went into plants communication. And then she said the plants started talking to her, and they were giving her how to run the experiment, how to do this kind of stuff. And this is like a professor in Australia that's sort of leading edge research where she's never got it, and then suddenly the plants start talking to her and communicating with her.
Yeah, I think the lesson there is we all really need to pay attention to these signs and synchronicities in our
Yeah.
lives. And
Oh, for
it's
sure.
so, yeah, it's so funny how sometimes, we can get busy or stressed or whatever we're going through in our day-to-day lives. And I have a tendency to unplug that connection. But you're right. As soon as I plug that baby right back in, it's like, whoa, I can't help but stay on this path. And there's been so many of these times. And I'll just give you three, three three big synchronicity. I'll start with the lower one first. After I went through this life change and moved and all this stuff, I was like, well, maybe it's time for me to just stop with the UFO research altogether. And so I started training to sell life insurance, to be an insurance agent. And as fate didn't like that very much and
Yeah.
said, "Oh, no, 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 you're not going to sell insurance." And the very next day, I get a phone call out of the blue offering me a different position that's kind of in the field, with contact in the desert and doing customer service and all that. And I was like, okay, I'm back in. Um,
Yeah.
Came to the Snippy book. Now, this is an interesting one. The Snippy book right here. This book literally came to me. I lucid dream all the time, but this was different. So I was in bed. It was probably 3 o'clock in the morning, and I literally woke up and I felt a vortex of energy start at my feet and go like up my body. And I was just getting download, download, download. I jumped out of bed, came down to the kitchen, started writing all these ideas. I went back to bed, a couple minutes, back up again. This happened 3 times. In the morning, I was
Wow.
like super hyper going, like, okay, this is what, next thing you know, we're talking to the King family. And then hence this project came out, which was a 6-month project. But
Wow.
it all came from this I felt very much downloaded. And what's interesting about that is Dr. Leo Sprinkle, who I feel very, very connected to,
Yeah.
he had his hand in the Snippy case. He had his hand in the Rocky Mountain Ranch case and others as well that I feel so tied to. So I don't know if it's Dr. Leo Sprinkle is my guardian angel or what. But one time in Sedona, Arizona, I was at a conference. I was having a rough day of it. I got lost. I was just having a rough day. And I was staying in an Airbnb. Leo Sprinkle had passed away 2 weeks before this event.
Oh, shoot.
And so
Oh.
I got into my Airbnb and I was sitting up on my headboard like this and I threw my cell phone at the foot of the bed, just
Yeah.
crying, just nah. Like I was supposed to speak first thing in the morning. I'm like, I can't do this. I was feeling all that doubt and all the things that we do. And my phone lit up and I
Oh,
went, and it was Dr. Leo Sprinkle calling.
wow.
And I went, Leo? And I just started laughing. And I literally got this kind of message like, Katie, get up, go do your talk. Everything will be fine. Get through it. And I did. And what happened from that, by the way, so I had some challenges in the morning. The audio wasn't working. I got with Ron James, who lived in Sedona, and
Yeah.
I got it all fixed. I got everything working just in the nick of time.
Yeah.
And what happened is I met this little boy named Kai. And Kai's mother, Yoko, and his dad, John, and this, I know that's John and Yoko, but his name was Kai. And this little boy he had his little crystal pyramid and he was so connected. Like he was by my side the rest of the day.
Wow.
I knew in that instant, like, this is why I had to get through so I can meet Kai and learn about Kai and see his drawings and talk with his family. And it was such a, it was such a magical kind of thing that happened. So that happened. And then last one, years ago, so I do this other thing that I've been researching for a while, which I probably will reveal at Contact in the Desert this year, which is the Roswell body connection. So Brigadier Arthur Exon rumored that one of the Roswell body ended up in a mortuary outfit in Denver.
Yeah.
Well, I've been researching this deeply for several years and I have many documents. I think I know where the body is and all this stuff. So I'll probably get that out. But so this has to do with a federal judge who had a hold on this little body, and it was stored in the basement of the mortuary, which was really close to a Mason Lodge in Fort Logan and Lowry Air Force Base.
Mhm.
And so the federal judge, he was appointed by Nixon. He
Mhm.
was the crash retrieval specialist, and he was also the infectious disease specialist, which I think is why one of the bodies ended up at Fort Fitzsimmons Lowry for that particular reason. Long story short, this judge had this hold on this body. So my mom at the time is living in a retirement for elderly people. And she's like, Katie, can you come do UFOs 101 for the folks at the home? I'm like, oh, I'd love to. So
Yeah.
I go to this presentation. And then I was talking about the Roswell body Denver connection and this federal judge and the Eisenhowers. And because it goes deep. So the federal judge and the mortician and the mortuary where this little body housed, they lived 3 doors down from Mamie Eisenhower. Okay. And there's also a Mason connection. Anyway, so I was telling them about all of this research that I'm finding out, and one of the residents goes, "You mean sure? His widow's on the 5th floor. You want me to go get her?" So
Wow.
I did 2 interviews with the federal judge widow that happened to be in the same place as my mother. Tell
Wow.
me how that
The
happens.
Yeah.
synchronicity of it.
Synchronicity. And
Yeah,
so it's an
synchronicity of
important
it.
interview and it's going to be an important piece of the puzzle when I, go to present all this because I have her audio giving some really important details to this whole
Wow.
mystery of the Roswell body connection. So
Why would they have a federal judge involved? Can you explain that part of the story?
yeah, well, it's interesting because the mortuary where the body and I know like people are like number one, why would one of the bodies end up in a mortuary to begin with? Why wouldn't they have just housed it at Fitzsimmons Lowry? How this all came to be in my cabinet over there is a little booklet written by the mortician.
Okay.
And the mortician who we went to Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and interviewed twice with a film crew. So we have that as well. But he was not into UFOs or aliens or anything like this. But in the basement of this mortuary, which is really close to the Mason Lodge, Fitzsimmons Lowry, and again, the guy who owned the mortuary, so the federal judge was a 33 degreed Shriner Mason.
Mason. Okay.
Yeah, and so they were all went to the same lodge together,
Oh, okay.
and they were close neighbors to the Eisenhowers. Okay, so this is a very close group of people. Again, the judge was appointed by Nixon. I feel like, being the infectious disease, and even the widow, when I interviewed him, he was back and forth to New Mexico all the time. Now, the crash retrievals are supposed to be, our our commercial aircraft or military aircraft, but he was also there for more suspicious reasons, which was interesting hearing from his widow. So this mortician, basically, this body is sitting where they store the chairs for years and years and years and years and years. He didn't think there was a body in it, and he got curious. He's like, "What's with the vault in the basement?" Oh, there's a federal judge that has a hold on that. And I even went to the probate office to try and get documents on this, because if there is a hold on it, there has to be records of it.
Yeah.
The problem with that is you need a name or a number. I don't have a number, and the little alien body certainly doesn't have a name. So you have to pay $5 for every guess. And I think I racked up like $80. I'm like, okay, I can't guess anymore, because I was just guessing things that maybe somebody would call it. But anyway, I didn't
Wow.
find anything. But long story short, this judge, curiosity gets a cat, gets to him, and his wife goes to Nebraska to visit her family, and he pulls off this caper where he goes down in the middle of the night, he opens the vault. He was mortified. It was a vault within a vault within a vault. So I
Wow.
have all his testimony, both recorded and in print. But he opens it up and he says, first of all, he was mortified that there was a body in there at all. And it was child sized. He said it was wrapped in 7 to 10 layers of formaldehyde cloth, and
Okay.
his eyes were running, his nose, it was burning, the smell of the formaldehyde. He said all the visceral was removed, the genitals were completely cut out. He said there were orifices for ears. He kept emphasizing the heavy brow, heavy brow, heavy brow. Eyes were larger, but
Yeah.
he did not think alien at this time, because my big question was, why didn't you take pictures? Why weren't you going, oh my gosh? He thought severely hydrocephalic child,
Okay.
and he was mortified that there was a child in there at all. And so
Yeah.
he felt like he disrupted. He was so he closes everything back up. It wasn't until years later, after they closed down that mortuary, it turned in, that mortuary is no longer there. I believe there's 1 or 2 places they would have moved this little body, but he actually was hang gliding in Roswell, because he was a hang glider, him and his wife. And it was just so happened he was hang gliding in Roswell and went to the Roswell Museum and learned of that rumor that Brigadier Arthur Exon said, and that's when all the bells and whistles went off. Oh my gosh, that's what I saw, and
Wow.
it was unfolded from there. So it's a fascinating case, and I pulled some documents from the Eisenhower archives that really kind of pieces it all together. Why they kept it there, I talked to Don Schmidt about it, and one of the first things he told me, he's like, you need to find out if Lowry had refrigeration at the time. But ultimately, it was put in layers of formaldehyde.
Wow.
Wow.
Fascinating story. That's
Yeah,
gonna be
yeah, it's really cool. I can't wait to share all the documents and share all the things I found on it, because I do believe there's a lot of threads that make a lot of sense, you
Yeah,
know, for
that
that.
makes sense.
it
Yeah.
almost sounds like another book. The search, or like a whole documentary of the search for this, that goes from here to here and this guy gets involved, and
Yeah,
it's
search for the Roswell body.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, because that's always the idea, where the bodies went, and there was all these, I watched Kid Green and stuff like that, where he was trying to figure this out as well, as to who the autopsy people were and stuff, and they made him all these promises that he'd see this kind of stuff, and it would always fall apart at the last minute and stuff like that, and he figured they were playing games with him, but it's fascinating story.
Yeah, yeah. I hope that people will be at least receptive enough to at least examine, the pieces I've unfolded, and we'll see what happens. But yeah.
Yeah, they'll move the body. That's the first thing they'll do. Is say
Yeah.
5 minutes before the lecture, it'll be in the mid Pacific somewhere on some island.
Well, that's the beauty of it, where this little body is. I really don't think anybody could get to it.
Oh, okay. Oh, there you go. You sound like
Yeah.
John Lear when I asked him about
Pretty
the
protected.
115 pieces, and he where the second one was, and he said, "I know where it is, but you couldn't get to it." And it's like, "What are you talking about?" And
Right.
I thought, well, did they put it in the bottom of a casino in the foundation of a casino, or what did they do with it? I was like,
Right. Well, people ask, like, why would the Eisenhowers bury it in the first place? Why wouldn't they just expose of it or get rid of it? But I've kind of thought to myself, well, if there's any truth to the fact, I don't know if Grant, I'd be curious to know if you believe that Eisenhower actually met with ETs. Um, if that happened, then maybe he felt some sort of like it deserves some sort of respect and a proper burial, like part of the family per se.
yeah. In those days, I think there would have been. I mean, there was more thing respect for bodies and stuff like that with funerals and stuff like that, where or even the Eisenhower grave, you see the amount of money they spent and how they, him and his wife where they're buried there out at the library. Your question, I think what I say is that you have all these connections that as you go along, and you're discovering the same thing. You go along and that's oh, you found something else, and well, I'm glad I didn't write the book yet, and you find more and more stuff as you go along. And that's what I found with the Eisenhower thing was people always ask me about that 54 thing. And yes, he did disappear. But when I went to the Eisenhower library, and so did Bill Moore, we both discovered that definitely the dentist wasn't involved. That his wife didn't know about it, and his
Yeah.
wife would have known if the dentist had worked on Eisenhower.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the thing was, the original document that was leaked out at the time said they were ethereal beings. They weren't Gray's beings, and that was came out 2 weeks after. And then later on, I discovered this whole thing with when it happened. It happened February the 22nd or something like that, 1954. And within a week of that time was the biggest radioactive nuclear disaster was the dropping of the first atomic bomb that could drop from a plane. And this thing had gone bad. They had miscalculated. They contaminated this whole island where like 95% of people got thyroid cancer, and it was just the Japanese fishing trawler got contaminated. All those people died, and it was just this great disaster. And so I said, well, if Eisenhower did, I think what they were warning him was to stop the nuclear weapons because they knew what was going to happen within days of that meeting. And that's what I say. If he did meet with aliens, I don't think it had anything to do with technology. It had more to do with them trying to give this warning to stop the nuclear weapons because they knew what was about to happen, and he just told them to get lost or whatever, and just went on with the plans that they're doing because you do know that they have the nuclear weapon stuff, and that's where I tied in where David Perkins mentioned he had that Gaia theory where he said it was all downwind and downstream for nuclear power activities. And he actually believed it may have been Gaia was doing the cadmium mutilation stuff. So the more you go, the more complex it gets, and the more sort of strings that tie it together. And yet it just gets weirder and weirder as you go along.
Yeah, no, that's amazing that you brought that up because this particular federal judge actually was the one who handled the big radioactive spill here in Colorado.
Wow.
So yeah, that's one of his biggest cases. What's really interesting, you go down to the archives and you try to pull this information because I went, of course, even at the Eisenhower archives, what's really great and which what I love to do is kind of pull threads that nobody really has pulled
Yeah.
before and looking at personal letters that were written because
Yeah.
that's where you're going to spill some things, right? Where
Yeah.
Mamie's talking to her friends around this time and what was said in these personal letters because all those are housed there as well and you can read those and there's a lot of little tidbits in there you can get. But in
Yeah.
particular, on this spill, I went and pulled the archives in Denver of this federal judge and just understanding the type of work that he was involved in with the radioactive spills and the infectious diseases. He was the one who did the toxic shock syndrome, things
Wow.
like this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that would make sense then if one of these little ETs had a certain organ or something they weren't understanding, to take it to Lowry Fitzsimmons, because at the time, Lowry was one of the best military hospitals in the nation.
Yeah.
So it would make sense they would have a specialist look at that.
Yeah, it was probably a small closed group of people where you had an expert at this and an expert, and everybody knew who the experts were, and they all had high security clearances, and they could call each other. Because I remember when we were talking to Walker about, we got the impression that he had been at the Kecksburg crash, and that's when we said to him, "Were you there?" And he said, "Yeah, I was there. So what?" And then it was like, "What do you mean, so what?" And then he said, we had other things to do. I only dealt with it for a couple days, and I had other things to do. Do you think that's all I did in my life? And he'd go like this whole idea was like, and that's my impression was people get called in for a couple days, they do their little job, and then they go back to what they're doing, and they keep that secret forever. But there's a certain number of people that are called upon that know expert on this and expert on that, and they all know who to go to, and they know they keep their mouth quiet and stuff like that. So it's fascinating that you've unraveled that piece because even the Roswell thing, you remember the MJ12 document, it talked about four dead aliens. And then we discovered that, the Canadians had been told in 1950 that mental phenomena was involved. And I was thinking, how could they possibly know that mental phenomena was involved before Adamski? Because that was the first sort of contact with aliens. And nobody was talking to aliens in 1950. And then I'm
No.
thinking, oh, the whole story had changed. The Roswell was three dead and one live alien, and the alien was talking in people's heads, and that's how they knew there was a mental connection to the UFO thing. And so as you go along, you're bringing out a new piece on the Roswell story. Everybody said
Yeah.
the Roswell thing is dead. All the witnesses are dead, and now you're going to bring another story from the Roswell thing, and it just keeps unraveling more and more as we go along. We get more and more explanation of what actually happened there. And it wasn't a simple story as people assume it was. Like, because now with this, with the Jesse Marcel Sr., he basically said, no, it didn't crash. It just exploded. This thing, it just said there was pieces all over the place. And he maintained absolutely that he didn't believe it had crashed.
Yeah, I think it's more important than ever to go back and re-examine these older cases
Yeah.
because now we can start making these connections via AI, where it
Yeah.
can search all these things and UFO decks with Ryan Wood. And back in the day, I spoke with Bob Wood about this. I mean, that's how long I've been kind of pulling this Roswell body thing. And, I talked to Don Schmidt and others because before I even went down this rabbit hole, I wanted to know I was at least going down some sort of a right path.
Yeah.
And they were all very both encouraging me to follow this and gave me some insight that I was like, all right, this could there could be something to this piece. So yeah. But Ryan Wood's UFO decks, I think, has been a great resource too for a lot of people. You can just go to ufodex.com, type in a question, and you get, these obscure cases and stuff, which are really cool.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. That he's done that intense work that leads you for researchers. For everybody else, it doesn't mean anything, but for people who are looking for new threads to pull, it's
Yeah.
fascinating. Cindy, have you got something? Because I've got another question to go.
So who do you Grant? Who do you think released Jesse Marcel Sr.'s
It's at that museum. If you're going down to the big museum that's what's his name is putting together the Triangle guy. Uh,
David Mueller, National UFO Historical Record Center.
yeah, and he got the files of that he was a reporter. He was Lee Spiegel. Lee Spiegel did the interview with him, and so Lee Spiegel's files went there, and they found this tape of he had interviewed Jesse Marcel Sr. and he'd never mentioned it when I knew Lee, and he never mentioned to me that he'd done this interview. And a lot of people were talking about the Roswell case, and he never came out and said, "Hey, well, I got an interview." And when he died, that's why I went to Stanton Friedman's files. I said, there's got to be something because everybody knows you've got something. You've talked to somebody and they said keep it quiet, and you've got it in a file somewhere. So when I went to Stanton Friedman's files, I figured there's got to be something here where somebody came and told him something that he never released, and I'm going to find this. And I was there for a whole week, and I did get the one thing with the Cuban thing where the shoot down to the Cuban missile, and I asked them if they had it, and they had actually filed it already. So I got that, and he had collected all the Lazar, all his court records and stuff like that. He had piles of stuff. But that's the thing that you and I, it's exciting. Like when you go to the Eisenhower Library, you're going there and you're seeing stuff that maybe one other person's ever, like the archivist, and maybe one person's ever looked at. Nobody's ever looked at it. And you mentioned the thing that I found too, because when I went to look for the UFO files, they said, "Oh, we got 5 pages," and I went, "What? How many pages you got in the archives?" They had 28 million. I said, "You only got 5 UFO things," and they had nothing, so there's nothing to do. So I started looking at the oral histories. Have you ever looked at those? And where they asked the cook or something, "You work for President Eisenhower, so what was it like to work for President Eisenhower as he leaves his job?" And they do this exit interview and they ask him all these questions. What did the president ever come in and steal food in the middle of the night? All these weird things. I remember they had the one with the woman that was with Eisenhower for 10 years, 2 years when he's running for president, and then his 8 years of presidency. And she was the woman, they've actually named some files after her there, but she sat outside the president's office and she was like the main person that if you wanted to get in, you had to go through her and the national security advisor. And they said, "It must have been great. You're a woman in the 1950s and you were right beside the president outside the Oval Office. How was it?" And she said, "It was the worst job of my life." And they said, What do you mean?" And she said, he wouldn't give me a day off. When my father died, I had to beg him to get a day off to go to my father's funeral. And she was
Wow.
complaining. She says, "And I went back to New York one time and my husband was living with another woman."
That's the gold. That's
Then you find out that's the thing. You find these things in these oral histories, or Eisenhower. She would argue with him like Eisenhower was golfing on the White House lawn, and then he would get rid of all the squirrels because they were bugging him when he was golfing, and he put them all and they bagged them up. The Secret Service bagged them up and took them down to the park. And she was arguing. She said, "The squirrels have as much right to be on the White House lawn as you do." And he was, "No, no." Or he was very racist, and she said to him, "You're racist." He said, "I came from the deep south, and that's the way it is." And she said, "Not from deep south. You're from Kansas. That's not the deep south." And she had all these arguments that she had with the president that you never would hear in public, but these people would tell it on their exit interviews because they're tell some interesting stories. I would every night I'd take 4 or 5 exit interviews and take them home to the library because or to the hotel because there's nothing else to read there. So it was fascinating stuff when you get in these archives because eventually you're going to find something that's just like no even the archives because they don't know what they're looking for. They're as you probably dealt with archivists, they're just interested in history. That's all they are. They're not conspiracy people trying to cover up or whatever, and they don't know if there's a body or something. They don't know what it means or whatever, and they'll declassify it. They don't know what's going on.
right. And I did that intentionally. Like I have a whole shelf right over here on my big library wall, and it's all the Roswell books.
Oh yeah,
And I intentionally, I mean, of course I know the basics and all that, but I didn't want to deep dive on this because I wanted to look at names through the archives. Like, for example, I pulled up a document that, to your point, they don't know what I'm researching. They don't know what my kind
yeah,
of running theory is. And I get this manifesto of how, the Eisenhowers wanted to do this under nightfall. They didn't want the public to know certain things. And then you have the short list of people that were on the train or the
yeah,
flight
yeah,
to do a certain task. And I'm pulling those names,
yeah,
these
yeah,
that are really close that aren't in those books.
yeah,
And I'm like, and if I can find those personal correspondence, I might find some gold that other people haven't even made that connection to
yeah,
yet.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's good as a researcher or an investigator to kind of start with a blank slate and not get tied into, continuing somebody else's path or narrative, but to start your own. And
yeah.
that's what I've tried to do in this case, because it's sort of something that hasn't really been looked into specifically was that. And it's again another synchronicity. I met, or actually, she reached out to me, a person who her father and her family owned a lot of the land over the Dulce base. I
Mm.
went to Pioneer Town. Tony and I did after not last year's Contact in the Desert, but the year before that to do an interview with the widow and daughter of this deceased CIA agent that owned this property in Dulce Base. He had General Brigadier Arthur Exon in their house. And
Wow,
I'm like, okay, tell me more. So
wow.
another weird synchronicity like that. And then that just keeps happening. So I feel like, okay, I meant to do this and it's got to lead somewhere. And it was put on the back burner for a while, but I'm getting back on it now.
Wow.
Good.
And then that's where you find that stuff is like at archives where,
Mhm.
people really don't know what you're looking for and it's amazing the amount of material they have there that you can and they can find anything. Like you just give them a name, you do an alpha search on this. I know I did with the one with Spielberg with Reagan and suddenly popped up in this this letter that had gone back and forth, and Reagan was talking to him about the movies and stuff like that, and you just play the word game and then the names, and you never know what's going to pop up. You're going to like the Landry thing for the when they discovered that Landry, who flew the president, he was aid advisor. He did the oral history and he talked about with Truman, where he had advised Truman orally on UFOs, and then people start tracking his name, and they get the grandson, and the grandson actually asked him about Roswell, and he said, if you knew about Roswell, nothing that you believe in the world would be the same again. Something to that effect that he told his grandson, and he said, before I die, I'll tell you the story of Roswell, and he never did. He died before he used to tell the family. So that's there's a step. I think there's still some threads to be pulled. I'm glad you're doing it. So, to talk about what you're planning now in terms of your next projects and what we can look forward to. Give us some little hints. The one you gave us with the your upcoming lecture, that's going to be interesting. I'd love to see that. I hope they live stream that stuff.
They live stream that, yep. So
Oh, I'm
that's
going to be watching that. That's for sure.
pulling that back together. Yeah, had Ryan Wood here a little bit. We're kind of helping him scan some documents and that for the UFO decks. So that's been a nice kind of resource to help with that investigation part. And of course, working on the Rocky Mountain Ranch book, building up my YouTube channel, Rocky Mountain Ranch Research with Katie Paige. I ended up accidentally deleting that, long story short, but continuing to build that up. I have some exciting new things that we mentioned earlier. So no, just plugging away.
You find yourself being overwhelmed, like with all the material that's coming now, where it's sort of like everything starts coming at one time, and you're trying to figure out like sort it all out, and where do you go next? It's like to me, it's like just it's incredible. Because I started in '75, and I told people, I mean, if you realize it was like in '75, it was like you write a letter to Stanton Friedman, and you wait a month for it to come back, his answer and stuff like that, and nothing was happening, and everything's just happening at the speed of light. And luckily, we got some younger people, like I call them the young guns. These
Yeah.
kids that have come in, the 2017 kids, after the New York Times article where they've come in and they know how to use computers and they know how to move fast and stuff. And these kids but they don't realize how slow it was back in the old days.
That being said, though, too, I feel like we kind of talked before the show, like garbage in, garbage out. And I
Yeah.
do like the technology and the resources we have. But back in the olden days, looking at some of these old historical cases, that's when a lot of the hard legwork was done.
Yeah.
Personally calling police departments and air traffic control and, blah, 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 blah. And it's just a treasure trove. And I think somewhere along the way that's gotten lost. So I like to hold on. Maybe it's my age, but I like to hold on to that old, old way of doing things, actually physically going to locations or archives and that. But it's a lost art, and I guess hence why even David Marler, getting all these PDFs and things scanned, so we can now get, and I think that's part
Yeah.
of Ryan Wood's mission, get the good information in, so we get good information out.
Or
You
get
know,
it scanned so that people can access it. Because I talked to everybody's sending their stuff to Rice University. And
right.
I was talking to Paula Harris, and I said, Paula, do you realize how many people are going to go to Rice University to look at your stuff? I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
you'll do it, I'll do it. And then Stan's dead now. I mean, there's people, the attention span on the internet is 8 seconds. I mean, people are just like, it's moving so fast that to take a trip to go sit in an archives or the Roswell. I mean, me and David Rudiak were sitting in the Roswell archives, and it was sort of like we're the only ones in there, and pulling boxes, and nobody's watching us, and it was just like it's like Christmas, like looking for something and hoping you're going to find some letter that nobody's ever seen before or didn't realize the significance, or pull names from the letter like you're doing, where you don't so much look at the person you're looking at, you look at all the people who are on the log of the flight. And who were these people? Who is this guy? And you
Right.
discover the guy that was running the like, for example, the when he was at the Palm Springs, the guy that was hosting him was the guy that owned all the bakeries in California. He was the big bakery guy, and so you start learning all these sort of names of who these people are and how it all fits together as to who are his friends and stuff like that, and how these things may have been moved around and talked about.
Right. And now we can marry the two, find those elusive names, and then pop them into ChatGPT, like I've done with Thomas H. Badinsky. Who's this guy? And I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
couldn't have done that the old-fashioned way, so it's kind of nice we have both to do that with now.
Well,
So it'll keep
did
us busy the rest of our lives.
did you mention this doctor to Desta? Because you may have, because she was talking to me this morning. She says, I'm getting this book out by the end of the week. That's it. I'm no more changes. And so, because they keep changes. So did you mention this name to her? Because,
I haven't. I've never
oh,
even.
okay. So it's her book won't be coming out at the end of the week. She's doing the child MK Ultra thing with the GATE program. And so you've got this sort of new name that she's going to start checking on. And that's what she did
Tell her
because
to call
her,
me. I'll talk to her about
yeah,
it.
because her mother worked for the guy in Winnipeg who was involved in the gate program or this kind of stuff, and that's how she sort of got dragged into it.
Mm.
And now you've got a new name that she's gonna be pulling stuff and realizing there was another sort of program, and that's what you want is the names of the people that were running it and the organization and stuff like that. And I didn't even know this stuff existed. I mean, I knew they were doing young children trying to psychic drive them and stuff like that. I didn't realize I didn't even know what the GATE program was. And so you guys are on this whole new thing that happened many years ago, and you're pulling this stuff out and sort of revealing new parts of history that nobody's ever heard about before, including
Yeah, it's
me.
so important. Yeah, you should have her reach out for sure. And thankfully we have people like Cindy. So you mentioned, you could be overwhelmed and you're getting pulled in all these different, but Cindy, because I know you can get quiet and I know you've kind of helped me like maybe slow down and focus on this or that. So I appreciate that too. I need that.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
you can
Cindy's the
channel
big
for where should
traveler.
I put my attention, Cindy? Maybe you can meditate on that for me tonight. Let me know.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I won't be traveling too much. I just got a part-time job at Rejuvenation, because Rejuvenation is owned by Williams Sonoma. Um, I need to, I have a whole house that I have to get furniture for, so I get 40% off at West Elm, Pottery Barn, uh,
Wow.
Rejuvenation.
Well, you may throw it out. You never know. Maybe the guy happened to have his father worked in Roswell. You never know. There's all these connections where you just sort of lightly put it out there, and you read. Maybe my last question for Katie is, you dealt with Chris Bledsoe. I wanted to because that was one of the biggest synchronicities I had. I've had quite a few of my books have started with synchronicity, but the most dramatic was the one with Chris Bledsoe, where he phones me up and says, "The Guardians have a message for you." And I go, "What is it?" The message is in the music. And well, okay, Chris, you're
Oh,
talking to the wrong guy. I don't listen to music. I don't play music. I couldn't care less about music. I'm a radio talk show podcast guy. And he said, "Well, you should listen to Zeppelin, Kashmir by Led Zeppelin." Whatever, Chris. And I'm just ignoring him. And then he said, "Don't you listen to Neil Young?" His song after the gold rush. And I said, Neil Young? And Neil Young grew up in the city where I lived for decades and decades. And Neil Young's involved in this thing, this UFO thing? Yeah, yeah. And so I started down that road and I ended up writing a book. And now I've written a second music book. And I say my father would roll over in his grave if he knew that his kid had written two books on music. He'd just be laughing. He couldn't believe it because I had no interest in music whatsoever. So what was your experience with Chris Bledsoe and what do you think about that case?
yeah. Chris, what a gentle soul he is. And I've got the pleasure to meet him a couple times through Contact in the Desert. And yeah, he said to me, because we're talking about trauma in children and
Yeah.
being able to call in, UFOs, UAPs, or orbs, whatever you want to label them. And he was so sweet. He goes, I want to put you in my pocket. I want to put you in my pocket. And I'm just like, oh, thanks. But that ability to do that is something I don't share often or talk about often. Have done that for quite some time, and I feel like anybody has the ability to communicate with the spirit realm.
Yeah.
Just keep your intentions good and positive and stay grounded and just go out there on a clear night and put out the intention. It's something individuals do not have to pay money to do.
Yeah.
Just quiet your mind. And so, no, I think that he's doing important work and his message
Yeah.
is a strong one.
Are you
So,
optimistic for the world? Because you hear these things. I'm just about to release a podcast about December the 19th this year. Jimmy Blanchette. I don't know if you've dealt with Jimmy Blanchette, but he has this mathematical stuff about the alignment of the planets and the distance between the this new object and the Earth and the moon and the Earth. And it's just like holy cow! It's like you see how it all lines up. And so,
Ratio.
and Chris is saying 2026. Elizondo and other people are saying 2027. What's your view? Do you buy into this sort of thing where we're about to have a disclose, sort of contact or disclosure, or do you see that it's just rolling along the same as it is now, where bits and pieces are going to come out?
Yeah, that's something that happened to me years ago where, I thought I was like, oh my gosh, you know, crystals and manifesting and knew what I thought were, oh my gosh, enlightening
Yeah,
moments. And then I go back and I read older journals and magazines. I'm like, oh, they were talking about this in the 50s and the 60s, and this is nothing new. And I'm just reinventing the wheel. And same goes with the disclosure movement. It's been going on. I mean,
yeah,
as early as I believe the 40s,
yeah,
50s. This is just this ongoing thing, and the predictions of end days that's been
yeah,
going on forever. So I tend to, not that I don't care necessarily, or that I try not to focus on that, because it kind of comes with a lot of fear and anxiety, and
yeah,
going kind of down that spiral. So I hope the best for humanity. I hope that we don't get wiped out by anything. And I don't know, what Three Eye Atlas is per se. I look at both sides of it. I hear, Mark D'Antonio saying, no, this is just an interstellar, it's nothing with
yeah,
aliens. And then you hear Avi Loeb saying other things. And I kind of do this, right?
yeah,
Um, so I guess overall, I have to be hopeful for the future. I have grandchildren, and,
yeah.
I want it to be a beautiful place for them. I do think for many decades there's been an awakening of souls, and I think it's increasing now more than ever.
Mhm.
So yeah, I have to stay hopeful.
So you've given me a new question, which you like. Mike Clelland always asks people on the scale of 1 to 10, what's your sense of mission?
My personal sense of mission on a
Yeah, do you
scale
think
of
you're on a mission?
Yeah, I'm probably at a 7 or 8 right now, just because I need to delve with some personal issues, right? Cindy knows. Once I get through that, which will probably be another 6 months, I'll be back up to a 10.
Yeah, because that's the idea that we all came here. That's the three waves that we're here to. We came here like when things get bad. I always say to people, you got to remember, if reincarnation is a thing, then you chose to be here at this time, this place, in the middle of whatever mess you find yourself in, and maybe you're in the middle of this mess at this time in this place because you chose to be here. You volunteered to come and said, "Oh, I'll straighten it out. Don't worry, I'll go down and straighten it out."
Right. Yeah. So you have to believe that. And sometimes I struggle with that one. Like, really? I signed up for this? But maybe that's true.
Yeah. Whatever happens, we're gonna have to deal with it. I mean, whether
Right.
because there's good things and bad things. If you look at your life, everybody has good things and bad things, and it's the idea. It's not what cards are dealt you; it's how you play your cards.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. I've been reading books on uh, Stoic philosophy, and that's
There you
kind of
go.
what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Anything you want to add, Cindy, before we shut down here?
I don't know. I just think every so often we need to continue to interview Katie, because she's just a
Oh
wealth
yeah, she's
of
got.
information, boots on the ground kind of person, and knows so many people. I really, when you were talking about Leo Sprinkle, the feeling I got was he's watching you. He's definitely guiding you. Absolutely,
I
100%.
feel
Yeah,
them
next
around quite often.
next time
Yeah.
we do an interview, I'd like to ask you questions about Leo Sprinkle because I didn't know his I didn't well wasn't dead when I went to the files the times I was there, but I'd like to ask you about what was in the files because he was a different type of character compared to everybody else. He was like the gentle sort of almost like a Chris Bledsoe, an older Chris Bledsoe, very gentle, calm, not outspoken, whatever, and you could basically trust what he was saying. I mean, he was.
Yeah, that could be the next interview. I have a lot to say about Leo, and I learned a lot about him and his work and kind of his journey. So I'd love to share that next time.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's schedule I'll put the calendar together. Let's do another one because he's really an important figure in ufology.
You sure is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
All
and
right.
I, I'd
Sounds
also
good.
want to maybe think up some questions because you're one of the maybe you and I are one of the only ones you have people making collections of their own, but people that run around and go to archives. I mean, Desta and I did a bunch of it, and we made the discovery of the 1939 piece that fell out of the sky, that was in the James McDonald collection and stuff like that. And it's very exciting to be in archives, but there's nobody doing it. So I'd like to maybe poke your brain a little bit more about being in archives, because people should know and be inspired. That's I used to spend all my holidays doing that. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
which archives am I going to this time? And I'd go there, and it's just like being in King Tut's tomb looking
I
for stuff.
agree. I love it. And I always have to joke though, because I raised five children, four boys and one daughter.
Oh
And
yeah.
I always said, I think I started really loving the archives back in the day because it was my escape. It was like this kind of peaceful, quiet
Oh, it is.
here. And
Yeah.
I just, but then you get addicted to that. And, you know, the American Heritage Center in Laramie, which I think, Grant, you've been to with
Yeah.
Dr. Leo's files,
Yeah.
Richard Haynes' a collection is there as well, and
Wow.
a couple others, but his is so organized. And we're talking, if you ever have a doubt about the reality of UFOs and UAPs, look through Richard Haynes' collection. And
Wow.
it's all just pilots, commercial,
Wow.
military, civilian, and you're just like, holy, and it's box after box after box
Yeah.
after box. And it's just
Yeah.
Well,
like
you
a
Now
know,
dream.
you've told me. I know where because Laramie is another one. It's in sort of in the middle of nowhere, and you
Yeah.
come up to the top of the mountain there, and it's kind of like very, cheap motels. There's
Yeah.
almost nothing
Teepee.
there, and it's just such a beautiful place to be in there and dig around. So I'm thankful for that. And I'll just end with this. We talked about the Eisenhower Library. The only thing I didn't like about the Eisenhower Library, and I was there a few times, was it's like everybody's wearing suits, and it's so formal, like the 1950s and stuff. And so it was like I was getting scolded. Like I kept saying, it's like I'm in kindergarten. It was like, take that pen. You're not supposed to put a pen in here. And then she comes and puts her hand out. It was like I was a little kid, puts her hand out. Your
Yeah.
gum, please.
Yeah. That is true. But
I
they
need to
do have
spit
the
my gum
beautiful
on the door.
museum. It's in Abilene, Kansas. They have the beautiful museum there,
Yeah.
which is great to see. So it's beautiful grounds, but they have the Russell Stover's Candy Factory.
Wow.
So
Oh, I didn't know that.
if you get scolded at the archives, you can go over and buy chocolate.
There you go. Yeah. And they've got his house there, his childhood home, which
His
is
childhood home is
kind of amazing. You realize this little tiny house that the former president grew up in. It was quite something to actually walk around in the house and stuff like. Abilene is like Laramie. It's sort of like in the middle of nowhere, and there's just nothing there except for
right.
a couple of things. And you walk around, it's like small town America, and just beautiful. I remember I went to go to the McDonald's. I always go to McDonald's all day long, and I go to McDonald's there, and all the farmers are sitting in there. And then I went back about 5 years later, and the same farmers are sitting in exactly the same seats.
And the chocolate factory.
Yeah.
The chocolate factory.
Okay, thanks a lot. I appreciate you're full of stories, and that's what we love here. People are
yeah.
going to love this interview, and best of luck. And I'll be tuning in on your lecture at Contact in the Desert, because I'm
Good.
fascinated. You've got a little bomb you're going to drop, and hopefully people pick up on it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
Okay,
All right.
beautiful.
Okay, Katie, you and I will talk.
Okay,
Okay.
so
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to go for coffee, in fact.
All right.
Okay.